I am a New Yorker and a subway rider. I have spent countless hours as a New York City resident on that subway. I used to commute every day. At my peak, I was on it 4 times a day on the New York City subway. Yeah, I was a 4-time-a-day rider. And when it goes badly, everybody knows that something's wrong, and because it's just, you got a couple of million people a day on it. Here is Mayor Eric Adams after this attack on the subway, and I'm putting aside the ideology of the attack and everything, just the fact the subway wasn't safe. The cameras were not working, by the way. Play clip 13. How is this possible?
Unclear if it was the feed or the actual device itself. We're communicating with the MTA, and they have been extremely collaborative in trying to find out exactly what happened. We have these cameras in the subway for a reason, to deal with attacks of this nature, so we could readily identify and apprehend people. And we're looking to find out exactly what took place here. And we will ask the TA to do an overview of all of the systems so we can identify if there are other cameras that are out.
Can we just say, he says the cameras are here specifically to help us in this, and the cameras were broken. And the New York City subway system, for years people have said there are these clocks that tell you when the trains are arriving, and 99% of subway riders want them because it makes it, is it going to be here in 5 minutes or 40 minutes? That's a big difference to how you're going to schedule your day. They take forever. You know why? They don't have funding for that. You know what they have funding for? Generally, pensions of city employees that are being, they're paying more for their workforce that's already retired. A lot of union stuff going on here. Point being, Clay, they can't even set up the cameras properly in the subway system, so we have video footage of the heinous crimes that are occurring on our subway system.
It's huge in this particular situation, too, Buck, because I would imagine not having video footage meant, one, they weren't able to as quickly identify 100%. Who the shooter was, and maybe that's one reason that he still is at large after 24 hours of the shooting. Also, that we now don't have direct, tangible evidence of the shooting. And that could matter in a criminal trial if, perchance, he's got a decent attorney and maybe there aren't people who are able to identify him perfectly. You want to have the video of the shooting. That's why the cameras are there. And to have them fail, that raises so many questions to me, Buck. First of all, the camera probably didn't just fail today. Somebody, I guarantee you, said, hey, the cameras aren't working at this subway stop. How many days had it been? Had it been a week? Had it been a month where those cameras weren't working? Why weren't they fixed? It's a level of incompetence given the level of crime that would make me furious if I'm a New Yorker or I'm traveling on the New York subway, as Allie, our producer, was texting she was doing this morning. There's a lot of people out there that are, I would imagine, feeling a great deal of trepidation about being on the subway given the crime rate.
So this subway stop is not the only one where the cameras are not working. Just so everyone knows, there's no chance that this just happened to be, right? So you have a decrepit system, and the subway is very problematic in New York in general. And a lot of people remember movies like Charles Bronson, Death Wish. They were making vigilante movies about New York City in the 70s and the early 80s. And one of the visualization of how messed up New York was the rickety, decrepit, graffiti-riddled subway system. And when that got all cleaned up, it was the visual manifestation of Giulianiism and Ray Kelly and Bill Bratton and these guys who came in and cleaned up the city. And we need to go back to that. We actually have a template for how to fix. And when I'm talking to you, I know folks listening now in Houston and Portland and Phoenix and these other cities that have had big crime spikes. I actually haven't seen as much in the major Florida cities. I want to dig into that a little bit more. I wonder if they've had the same level of increase. I haven't checked the statistics, so I want to be clear. But I want to see how Miami's doing, how Tampa's doing. But in those other cities, the same kind of logic applies. But here's Mayor Adams, Clay, talking about the crime rates and his view of how they can deal with it.
We are going to get better. This is going to be a safe city. And we've been here before. 1984, when I started my policing career, this was a city that was filled with violence. Our subway systems were unsafe, but we had the right energy and spirit to turn that around, and we're going to do it again. But let's be clear. We're dealing with historical inequalities, historical abandonments, and failures. And as I stated, there are many rivers that will continue to feed the sea of violence if we don't dam each river. We have an overproliferation of guns in our city and in our country. We need to stop the flow of guns, including ghost guns. That's a real crisis that we are facing. If we want to solve this problem, it's about all of us getting on board, not those who are living in an alternate reality of what's taking place in reality on our streets every day.
Clay, can I just say he's wrong. He doesn't get it yet. And I don't think it's just that he says this for his base and for the Democrats and the Democrat left machinery in New York City. It's not about historical inequality, okay? That's just pandering. That's nonsense.
It's also not accurate. Even if you want to argue on inequality, 2022 is not the most historically,
that's exactly what I mean,
right? I mean, that's
10 years
the total
ago,
lie.
Under the Bloomberg administration, for example, was New York so much more equal, and now it's become so much less? No,
of course
the
not.
murder rate was at an all-time low. It was super safe. Here's the problem with New York. The conservative approach to crime, which Bloomberg, to his credit, continued. He's, was a Republican, but not really. He's a Democrat. He continued because he is smart. He's got some bad ideas on guns, but he's a smart guy. Then it got so safe that no one even cared, Clay, to your point about how it's a luxury of low crime moments.
Yes.
So you're absolutely correct. And that's how you had this buffoon de Blasio come in, and things were so good and so safe that his stupid policies took a few years, took time, and then the momentum went in the other direction. So the historical inequality thing, to the point you and I are both making here, is just absurd. That's just pandering. And then on the issue of guns, the people who are shooting, there's a sharp rise in shootings right now in New York City. There has been for over a year. The people who are shooting individuals don't care where they get their guns, and the chance of New York City lowering the crime rate by being stricter. You already go to prison for 3-4 years.
It's almost impossible to get a gun in New York City legally, right? To have a concealed carry permit.
Concealed carry is basically impossible unless you're rich and famous and important and connected. And even a premise permit is a joke and have to be, for all of you out there, all of our listeners in Texas and in Oklahoma and in Nebraska and even in Vermont, got to be laughing at this. Clay, after you go through the 6-month process to get a legal handgun in New York City, which you can only have at your premise or taken to the one range in the 5 boroughs of New York City, you have to keep it in a lockbox with a trigger lock on the gun in the lockbox, and in a separate lockbox keep your ammunition, which is super helpful to throw at the burglar when there's a home invasion going on. You got 2 shots with your lockboxes.
Well, that's why the argument, and I think that's important to mention, because I think a lot of people are staring at their radios like, you cannot be. That's how difficult it is to have a legal handgun right now in New York City. So the idea that they're going to have more regulation and it's going to somehow restrict violent elements from getting guns is laughably absurd. And he has to know that as a guy who was on the streets in 1984. And by the way, he has to also know that this argument of we're at historical inequality rates is a total BS line, because he lived in New York City when there was much higher rates of inequality and injustice than exist today. That's just a fig leaf cover story for what is a disaster on the streets of New York City right now.
And Democrats, whether it's Nancy Pelosi in her San Francisco Bay $15 million mansion, or down to the commissioner of the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams here, Democrats who embrace these bad ideas that are then implemented through policy, so there's action that comes from this, the people who suffer are disproportionately black and brown residents of major cities who want to go about their lives in safety, peace, and security, go to work, pick up their kids from school, send their kids to school without shootings happening, without being hit by stray bullets. They don't want their property values for the homeowners to be going down because of the increasing crime. All these issues, they make everything worse with this. Here's the straightforward way, Clay, that you could turn around crime in New York City and every other, as I said, Phoenix, Houston. Houston's having terrible year for crime.
Yep.
It's having a record
Up
year
20% in murders. We were talking about that yesterday.
Obviously Chicago, year in and year out. There are a number of places. Birmingham, Alabama, a city you and I just hung out in recently. A huge crime problem there. We love our affiliate there, all of our great listeners. They got some rough parts of that historic old city. Here's how you do it. Enforce the law, lock up criminals, be serious about criminal justice. That's it. And that's top to bottom. That's from the mayor all the way down to the patrolman. That's from the prosecutor's office, the district attorney, all the way down to the assistant district attorneys and their paralegals. Everybody. I want everybody in the system to know if people are hurting individuals, if they're hurting their communities, if they're a danger to society, we are going to take them off the street and we're going to make an example of them. That has to. You do that, it all changes. All this other stuff, talking about community investment, violence interrupter, all this stuff, fine, but not going to do anything. I'm not opposed to it, but it's not going to stop the problem.
Again, and I think we just got to keep hammering it, being concerned about putting too many people in prison or in jail is a luxury of a low crime environment. And that does not exist anywhere in the United States right now. We got to get back to holding criminals accountable for their misdeeds. Wherever you're listening right now, DAs have to do it. We have to let police do their jobs. And I think we are swinging back in that direction in a rapid, rapid fashion.